Well, the time is 9:16, and we're going to call the Business and Governance Committee to order. Rosie, do we have a quorum?
Yes, Madam Chair, we do have a quorum with Ms. Michelle Bush absent.
All right, thank you. And Chris Brewster, this is his first B&G meeting. I want to welcome you. I was here to see you at your first Disability Committee meeting, and you did just great. So we welcome you here and look forward to having you on our committee.
Thank you.
I want to remind our committee members that when voting on action items, please use the board voting system when making a motion and providing a second to a motion. Rosie, do we have any public comment today?
No, Madam Chair, we do not have any public comment for today's meeting.
All right, we're going to hop right into our action items. Number 1, staff's recommendation to approve the annual cost of living adjustment effective July 1st, 2023. Marcel.
Good morning. This is an annual event that comes to you each May to approve the annual cost of living adjustment. It is in all 3 of our plan sponsors' documents how we calculate this, but it does still say the board needs to ratify it. Did a little research on it recently. This started July 1st of 1971, so this has been around for quite some time. This year, it is a 6.5% increase. 2% will be effective on July 1st of 2023. The remaining 4.5% is banked into the COLA banks to be used in subsequent years if the COLA is not at least 2% in those years. And the other thing, I had some questions on this. We have not, since we've been doing this, had a negative COLA year, but it is possible, if there was a negative, that it would reduce benefits. Not below what they originally were, but it could take back some of these COLAs. But it has not happened. The lowest we've had is 0.6. And happy to answer any other questions you may have.
Any questions? No, hearing none?
Question.
Okay.
Sorry, just a comment. I've received a fair amount of feedback on this from retirees who are obviously dismayed by the reality that the maximum possible is 2%, and inflation has been raging in the last couple of years, such that it looks like over the years, inflation's been somewhere around 2.25%, 2.5% on average. So they were slipping behind to start with. But for these 2 years, now they're behind an extra close to 10%, basically. And I think those retirees just asked me to make note of the reality that under the current circumstances, and SDCERS can't do any more than the 2% because that's the only thing that's allowed. They just wanted me to note that they are slipping behind as a result of that. And there was some good, there was a good article in the paper, I think yesterday or the day before, mentioning this. And there has been some discussion by a couple of the council members about whether or not they should address this. So just bringing it up for information, nothing we can do about it here. Thank you.
Do we have any other comment? And Chris, I just want to make one comment. You know, we look at this over a long period, and the past couple of years have been higher, but for the last 10 years, the average was 2.5% on the average. I mean, and that's what it's hovered around for the last 30 years. So although these last 2 years have been very difficult, and I appreciate that, especially this type of inflation that we've had. So just keeping that in mind, that it's a very long-term perspective.
Yeah, and I agree. And I think that I think one of the frustrations that retirees have is that they see that Social Security is fully indexed for inflation, whereas that's not the case here. And so, you know, they're observing that and obviously looking at their buying power eroding.
I can appreciate that, right. So I need motions, and I have them. Tom moved, and seconded by Paul Kaufman, and let's vote.
And Madam Chair, with all votes in, the motion passes 5-0.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to the second item. Staff's recommendation to review and amend various board charters. Johnny?
Thank you for reviewing all these documents. It's a best practice that we have. We do it in little chunks to make sure we get through everything every 3 years. So really appreciate you reading this big packet. We're asking you to review the Board Officer Secretary Charter, the Chief Compliance Officer Charter, which we have no recommended changes to, but obviously you're in charge of looking at those two things. The Education Policy, which we took a look at during the retreat, and in a second, Marcel's going to highlight the changes that are being recommended as a result of that conversation of that April retreat. Board Rule 2.130, which concerns what pay codes are acceptable as pensionable pay under PEPRA for our airport and port employees. And lastly, Division 7. So Marcel, could you help out with the presentation of the education policy?
Absolutely. Good morning again. So at the retreat, there was a presentation with some recommended changes to the education policy. The biggest change was to have the list of courses that are educational opportunities approved by the board on an ongoing basis, but no longer have approval of each board member's specific education plan done at the beginning of the year, as we had done. So going back in history even further, used to be every board meeting, we approved training for trustees. And then we changed it to do it in January to look at a calendar for the whole year. And this is changing it once again so that we wouldn't be approving specific travel for trustees. Instead, we'd be putting parameters around what trustees can do. So it would be the courses that are approved by the board, and those are put on the agenda with the help of Greg and Melanie Peter and our legal team, putting together those classes, finding things that look appropriate and look like they would provide benefit. So that would go on the agenda every month, as it does, or every other month, every board meeting. And then board members would be able to attend those courses without getting additional approval. The guidelines are they can attend up to 4 educational opportunities that require SDCERS to pay for it. But exempted from that 4 is anything put on by CalPERS, SACERS, or our investment managers. So if Aon was to put on a conference, that would not count as one of the 4 that you had to, one of your forward paid conferences. So that's one big change. The other change is to put on there that the conferences should be in North America, and so have that as one of the guidelines. There was also a recommendation that was presented at the retreat to say that conferences should have at least 5 hours of educational content. There was significant discussion, and the recommendation or the request from the board at that time was to say that they have significant educational content. So those changes have been made, and I think I covered all the pieces. Substantial content. Substantial, what did I say? Oh, sorry, substantial educational content. So I'm happy to answer any questions you may have on how this came about or how it would work in practice.
Any questions?
Yeah, one question. Marcel, I was looking at the educational conference piece of this, and maybe this may seem a little self-serving, but there's a specific clause in here for first-year board members, right? So it is 5AI. And I noticed in here that the way it's written might be interpreted to suggest that in the first year, a board member should only attend a single conference, because it says, in addition to attending the orientation session, they should attend one educational session, and so on and so forth. And I'm wondering if that was the intent, or if some small wording change might make clear that it goes beyond one.
If I may, we could actually change that word from one to an. So, you should do your orientation and you should go to a governance conference, and then all the other rules apply. Maybe that would eliminate that ambiguity.
Sounds great to me.
We can make that change when it comes to the board tomorrow.
Thank you.
That was quick thinking, Greg.
Any other questions or comments?
Okay, hearing none, moved by Paul Kaufman, seconded by Tom, and let's vote.
And with all votes in, Madam Chair, this motion passes 5-0.
Great, thank you. All right, moving on to an information item. We have Sandra Clausen, Retiree Health Practices and Policies.
Good morning. So you have before you a very comprehensive history and summary of the city's retiree healthcare program. It was heavily researched by Marcel Voorhees-Rossmann, so you know it is accurate and meticulous. What I think was most striking really was that of the 41 years that the city has had a retiree healthcare program, SDCERS has only administered that program 12 years. And we stopped administering it when the IRS prohibited the use of SDCERS trust funds to fund the program. So over the past decade, SDCERS' only role has been to enroll and disenroll retirees from the healthcare plans, to pay reimbursements for healthcare premiums and Medicare Part B premiums, and to communicate with retirees on healthcare issues and events like open enrollment. It's also interesting to note that SDCERS services less than half of the city retiree health eligible population, and that group is closed and shrinking because of the changes to the retiree health care plans. So that's where we've been, but where are we going? For several years, SDCERS and the city have been discussing if SDCERS is actually the right vendor to service retirees, and perhaps the city and, more importantly, retirees would benefit from having a vendor who specializes in retiree healthcare services, who would be able to maintain service levels during peak times, and already have invested in modern technologies and vendor client portals, something that we don't currently have for our retiree health program. At the beginning of this year, the city began to actively work towards seeking out other vendors who would be better suited to take over the SDCERS service group. They engaged a consultant to work on a request for proposals from vendors who specialize in retiree healthcare administration. We worked closely with the city on the scope of work for the RFP, and will be participating in the review process with the city and representatives from the retiree associations once the RFP is released and responses are received. But I can tell you that the RFP is not out yet. The city initially set a highly ambitious goal of having the RFP processed and a vendor in place by this summer who would be able to handle the open enrollment process this November, and that is seeming increasingly unlikely. So it looks like SDCERS will be involved in open enrollment this year. SDCERS has committed to the city, the Retiree Association, and to our retirees that we will continue to process retiree health care until the city determines that it should switch vendors. We look forward to working with the city and the retiree associations to improve retiree health care processing, especially if that means the city switches to a vendor with better response times, quality, and ease of use with technologies.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
It's a wonderful idea. It's just a wonderful idea. And is there anything that we can do to motivate the RFP being issued?
I understand that it is, it's actually completed and with the purchasing division to be released any day.
Great news, isn't it? It's great.
If I may, first of all, this is a fantastic document, the historical stuff, so thanks for that. I really, I guess I'm a little wonky, but I was just fascinated to see how, for example, there was a proposition voted on by the voters, ultimately got overruled by IRS rules that's still in the municipal code, even though it's negated. Yeah, interesting stuff. But I just wanted to mention that there have been really good meetings between SDCERS, the risk management director, the two main retiree associations. I've had an opportunity to sit in on those meetings. Very, very good stuff. Everybody is working together collaboratively. I think it was really helpful that Sandra was there to explain what the realistic timeline is to get this done, so that the city could look at, oh, are we really going to make this timeline? And I think also it was really comforting to the retiree associations when Greg said, hey, if they can't get it done on time, we'll hold on to this. We will stay on top of this, so these retirees, and there's over 5,000 still, including me, so I'm paying attention to this, who are still affected by this. So the way this has been handled of late has been, I think, really good. And now the next step, I think, for the retiree associations and for the city is to get the information out to the retirees, most of whom who don't know that all this stuff is going on. And of course, retiree health care is really important to retirees. So I think this is going to take some very careful public relations to explain what's going on and to assure them that their benefits are going to continue uninterrupted. There's just going to be a different administrative overseer. And I think we're on the right track to ensuring that. But yeah, we do have to see where this RFP goes. So, and one other thing, the current system includes a contract with a group called Care Council, who act as ombudsman for circumstances in which retirees' health care, where they run into problems with their health care provider. And I suppose a minority of retirees avail themselves of it because most of the time their health care is taken care of without any problem. But when they have, it's a highly desirable service where somebody advocates for the retiree with the health care provider. So SDCERS has maintained that contract all along, and there was some concern as to whether the city could pick that up and continue it. Happily, they worked with the city attorney and have determined that they can take up the contract as of, I guess, January 1 of 2024 for at least a couple of years before they'll need to go out to bid for it. So it's good that that's going to continue as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Tom?
So as far as the staff that are currently doing this job, if the RFP is successful and it gets moved to a vendor, what are those people going to be doing in the future?
Yeah, so that's one of our challenges. We had a staff of 4. Now we are a staff of 2. We had somebody who transferred to another part of the benefits admin division, and then we had somebody who went over to risk management. So we're actually down to 2 people in that group. If retiree health completely goes away sometime in 2024, I think we could probably absorb at least one person. The other person is in drop and may end up, with the timing of it, working all the way through drop. So really the jobs are not really in jeopardy at this point.
Marcel, could you?
Yeah, so we are working closely with the city, and the city is working closely with MEA. So MEA is aware that this is going on. One of our challenges is there's something in the city that's called a RIF process, where if your job is eliminated, which would be the case, that the MEA and the city work to find you another position. So this one individual that we don't know that we would have a place for would go through that process. One of our challenges is both MEA and personnel want to know, what's the date? When is this person going to get riffed? And I can't tell them that because I don't know when this is going to happen. The RFP hasn't hit the street yet, or if it's going to happen. The RFP could hit the street and fall flat on its face. So at this point, we are working closely with the city and MEA, but we don't know yet when this is going to happen. We do need to maintain somebody to still handle pieces, because even if the RFP is successful and there is an outside vendor, we anticipate that we still will be working with that outside vendor to have those payments come directly out of retirees' paychecks. So there's still going to be the need for someone to interact with that other vendor. So that's why we feel like we've got at least one position that we would hold, but the other one, we wouldn't have functions for them to do. And it's a unique classification that we don't have any other people. In fact, there's nobody else in the city with that classification anymore. It used to be risk management, and SDCERS had that classification. Risk management has eliminated all of the positions with that classification. So we are working closely, but as Sandra said, it's an individual who's in drop, may make it all the way through their drop contract before we actually see something happen.
Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Sandra, that was great. And thank you, Chris and Tom. Those were very good comments, and I'm glad you brought those issues up. Moving on to the reports, Cynthia Queen. Cynthia, you have 3 staff people that were honored by the city. Are they here today?
No, we make them work.
Oh, my. Will you please tell them that we're very proud of them, and congratulations, employees of the quarter for the whole city. So thank you very much for their work.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. And I did mention to Marcel how it would be my greatest joy to parade our team down here and show them off. We're a pretty bunch, and but there is work to be done. But thank you so much for that, Bobby. I do appreciate that, and I am going to mention that briefly. So wonderful to see you all today. Tom, great job on chairing disability. Appreciate your service. And great job, Sandra, on your report, too. So Bobby mentioned about the staff, and I feel like the way I want to describe this is based on our core value of integrity and looking at how SDCERS has grown and evolved over time, which lots of things are good examples of that. But something that I love about SDCERS and as good organizations as a whole is when they work hard to grow their own people and promote them. And it has been so much fun to see that happen with some very qualified people through the completely official, proper interview process and all of those things, which I also love that about all that we value around here. But it's just been wonderful to see the dominoes roll up the hill. So it is very exciting that for the first time in a very long time, we have a fully staffed call center. I appreciate that you appreciate how much work they do. So one of the longtime call center team members promoted up to being the call center lead, which is wonderful. It makes me so happy. So that's Selene Rodriguez. She's done a wonderful job and has worked really hard to develop a new staff because there is a lot of training that goes on. And some of the newer folks that we have are Krista Rue, Jennifer Colvin, and Andres Molina. Then we have one of the veterans that Bobby is talking about on there. Her name is Claudia George, and she's been with us for about 5 years, and she was recognized as Employee of the Quarter for her always outstanding work. We now have a full-time receptionist who's getting through their training, and we do want to welcome Fiona Finau, and just been a wonderful person up there at the front reception desk, just making sure that we are the very welcome, open doors that SDCERS strives to be. And this whole team is managed by Member Services Manager Victoria Fedelizo, who is in the back today. She was allowed to leave her work for a moment to go downstairs because what goes on here is very important. I want everybody to know about it. So their job has grown and evolved like everybody else's job, and it has been so interesting how the unwinding of Proposition B has affected that. Even the changes in the healthcare, are all reflected in calls that come through the call center. And, be amazed at the questions that people ask. So I believe that you all do understand that because you listen, and I appreciate that it isn't just that someone's calling to make an appointment. They are calling, asking a question, and you first have to decipher what they were talking about after you've done all the security questions. So there's time involved just in getting that far. So I do want to mention the call wait times, which I think are very important. There's a number of other statistics that I would like to have my reports rolled out on, but my excuse is I'm busy handling these Prop B people who require a lot of hand-holding. So it is, the call wait time is one statistic. It's interesting to me, I've said this plenty before, that I could give you a 5-second wait time if we didn't do any security questions and just hung up on people. I could rock the stats, but that would do no good. And I want people to get the right answer, and I want them to have a timely response. So to me, that increases the call wait time because of the complexity of this. It's more of technical calls. But it is interesting, Victoria just gave me the updated stats, and in April, the wait time came down a little bit, a minute and 15 seconds, which I still think is great. And it's May 11th right now, but right now the call wait time is averaging 36 seconds. Don't keep your hopes up too much on that. I still want to make sure everything's happening correctly, but it's just interesting to see if you have an actual staff there to answer the phones, to do all the other tasks, to handle all the emails, which is an excellent way for people to ask us questions and get all those responses out there. So just a big shout out to the team for all their efforts, and they are just a wonderful bunch. As far as what you think of as customer service and just a wonderful attitude, and you can hear the smile just all day long. It's great work.
Cynthia, quick question.
Yes.
Call wait time. Is there some reason why that red call goal line is sitting at 30 seconds? I mean, you mentioned all the reasons
Yep.
for the initial stuff. I was wondering.
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe it's time to raise it up a little
Yep,
bit.
thank you. And so I'm sorry, Bobby, you want me to go ahead?
He's right. He's right.
Yeah, yes, and I had mentioned it a little bit in some time back, and I've definitely talked to Tom about that, and I appreciate it. I'd actually written up a report that changed it, and we just, let's wait until we're fully staffed, because I also don't want to make it be where, it's very important to me how this all works. So we definitely have talked about that, and our first finish line to get to was having the team fully staffed, and so we are definitely now looking at where we would adjust those wait times to. Let's say it might be a minute or something like that. But again, it's also important to me that we have other reports that we are working on developing that I think you would find very interesting. Just one example for more color is I have that chart on the end that says a number of calls answered by the intro message. That was a really good tool when we were super short-staffed and didn't have all these Prop B people and stuff, but that doesn't matter to me as much anymore. That intro message doesn't quite accomplish what it used to. Now, there are other things that are more important. For example, does every call contact ticket that comes through the website, is that responded to in 24 hours? That's what our goal is. Want to make sure of it. We have ways to track it. So I would love to continue to be wonky with the statistics and bring you more. I'm still not done, but go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, I have a quick question. So as far as the total number of calls, roughly 2,000 a month, how many emails are you guys receiving?
It's, hold on, I have it right here. Let me make sure I get it right. Because sometimes I exaggerate. It's 50 web inquiries a day. Yeah, which is great. I'm so pleased. People learned that during the pandemic. Okay, I'll continue on now. Second thing I just wanted to highlight is this unwinding of Proposition B, and it is a fascinating overall project, but we had a unique group that we've been taking care of for about the past 2 months, and this is a group of employees who came and went and came back all during the Prop B era. But to make things more complicated, they had withdrawn funds from their SPSP, which is what everybody else is using to pay back into SDCERS. So it was literally less than 40 people, and it has been complicated but also very individualized, working with the city. And the point I want to make about this is that we've all heard a lot about our operating system that we call IRIS, because it's beautiful. And when a person comes in for a counseling appointment, or if you're asking them a question, we can see so much information about you, exactly how old you are, exactly how much service credit you have, what reciprocity you have, where you've come and gone to, blah, 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 all these things about your plan. For the Prop B people, we do not know who you are. We don't know how old you are is actually incredibly important to this conversation. And we know your name. It was even, honestly, we had to create a spreadsheet just to make the appointments because everything is fantastically automated through IRIS. So got all that going, able to get it there. And these folks were coming in with honestly, it was very complicated. Had to read the letter. It was a very good letter. Had to read it a number of times. Once us expert people figured it out, we had to help the members figure it out. It was complicated. And so a key piece, just to summarize it, was a decision about whether they would pay an additional amount of money to purchase a certain period of time. One of the options of how you might pay for that would be on a payment plan, because maybe you're 30 years old and you don't have $30,000, $50,000 sitting in your some other account because not old like me. So we would look at a payment plan, and we want to be prepared before they come in because a payment plan can't go past life expectancy, and you don't really want anybody on a 30-year payment plan and all these things to think about because you're paying extra interest. And so we had a way of guessing at their age based on these numbers that were in the letter, and so we just found a bunch of workarounds, and it was fun once we kind of got about halfway through it and figured it out. And then just coordinating with risk management, who we obviously partner with a lot. So it was a great little brain teaser, and I'm just very pleased. We got everybody through their deadlines. We're still handling a few of the parts of helping folks make sure that they get the money over here by the deadline that is at the end of June. So still working on it, but glad to have assisted that group of people. And that is a tiny little piece of it that we handled, and when Marcelle gives her report, she'll give you a big old overview of all the stuff that she's been doing on it, which is amazing. So thank you for listening to that, and do you have any other questions?
So you're waiting on the city to give you more information so you can fill out in IRIS? You're waiting for the city to get the information?
Yeah,
so you know
and it's
how old they are and so forth?
Exactly, and it's I'll try not to be too geeky on it, but it's part of a very regular process, an automated, we call it the transmittal. And so a piece that Marcella and I are working very hard on right now, and the whole team, is when this information will come through the transmittal, and then they'll be like, wah, we'll see all their wonderful information. And at that point, it would be easy to assist them in the future. But in order to help them decide if they want to join, we just, you could just do nothing and do your best in the appointment, but we are professionals and we want to be prepared and have as much information ready as possible because we're doing this on top of all the other regular appointments. So I think the team has done an amazing job. And I allowed a couple of those other award winners to go on vacations after this. So right now, Sarama Valenzuela is upstairs holding down the fort, doing a whole bunch of appointments today, waiting for the other one to come back. So it's pretty cool to see how it all works out in a very complicated way, but to see what some very smart people can pull off under a required unwinding of something. So thank you for asking.
So Cynthia, first of all, I just want to make a point that I think why this works is because of the empathy that you show. And, that's not a norm in big organizations and so forth. And so I really commend you on that piece of it. But I did want to say, I can see some disappointment that you're not going to have a challenge like this in the future because Prop B is going to be resolved and then you won't have all this fun. So I'll be working on something new for you.
Thank you. I'm going to come hang
done.
out more at REA. It's
Okay.
awesome. So,
Thank you.
Anyway, thank you, Chris. Appreciate you being here. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Cynthia, and please thank your staff. I mean, it's an amazing thing that you have all accomplished together. All right.
Hello. So I'm going to continue talking about Prop B a bit. Following up on that particular group, this is all part of the Phase 2 people. These are people who were employed by the city during the Prop B years, were still employed by the city on July 8th, and based on their bargaining unit, either were automatically enrolled in SDCERS or had to make a decision. It followed what I think is a pretty normal business practice. 90% of it was piece of cake, in quotes. It was not exactly piece of cake, but it was really straightforward. That's the 3,200 people that we got enrolled back on July 9th of 22. This is part of the stragglers, that 10% that's taking about 70% of the work because of their unique circumstances. So this last group was only 38 people, but it was a significant amount of work, and it continues to be. Risk management's in the process of getting their information put in because they will be retroactively entered into SDCERS, either effective back to July 9th or September 17th as appropriate for their particular circumstances. So there's still a bit more work on that. But we're getting close to Phase 2 being finished, and we already have been working on Phase 3 and are still working on that. So the city did reach tentative agreements with MEA, Local 127, and DCAA. My understanding is they reached the same tentative agreement with Local 145 on how to handle the Phase 3 group. These are people who were employed by the city during the Prop B years, but separated service before July 8th. So they were not active employees on July 8th. I'm sure Chris picked up on this. I did not mention Local 911, which is our lifeguard union, and that is because there are no lifeguards that did that. So they didn't have to negotiate with lifeguards on how to handle those employees. But there were people in all of those 4 unions. So the initial agreements that were negotiated and presented to council as tentative agreements said that contracts would go out to all of these members on all these employees on June 30 of what it looks like. SDCERS still does not have the data on these employees. So we are working with the city on the timing and on what this is really going to look like. We have to first get the data from the city that gives us their entire employment history with their salary history. My team will do an analysis of that, and with the last big group, our analysis had some back and forth with the city that took about a month of back and forth questions. Once we feel like we have good, clean data, it goes to Chiron, and it's going to take Chiron a couple months to work through the contracts for this approximately 2,200 people that we're looking at. So once Chiron gets their contracts done, and again, Chiron also is looking at the data, and Chiron found things that my team didn't catch and had more questions on the data. I anticipate the same thing will happen, so that's about a 2-month process. Once Chiron has their data and gives it back to the city, then at that point, the city can send letters out to these 2,200 people and say, here are your options. The city, quite some time ago, started doing outreach to this group, and they sent them an initial letter quite some time ago. I think I have it in here. Maybe not, but they did send a letter out to them saying, keep posted, there's something coming. One of the reasons they wanted to do that was to see if they had good addresses, because these are people who separated service, and they may have separated service close to 10 years ago. And there's no reason that the city would be keeping in contact with them because they're not city employees. SDCERS doesn't have any information on them because they were never members of SDCERS. So they are working to make sure they've got good contact information for all of those people. And we will continue to work with the city on getting this last piece done. So happy to answer any questions on the overall Prop B process or any specifics. Yes.
So if an employee was either part-time or seasonal not benefited, but they're grandfathered into their hire date and they come back in 5 years from now, would they be treated the same way as these people? Or would they just be like a new hire coming in? How does that look?
So if I understand your question, you're talking about no standard hour employees. Mm-hmm. If they have never had any time with the city that would have been time eligible for SDCERS, and they've continuously worked for the city ever since they were hired in a no standard hour position, when they finally do become a benefited employee, then they are eligible to enter SDCERS, actually not eligible, they're required to enter SDCERS into the plan that was effective at the time of their hire date. For all of these people, it would be, because they're Prop B people, right, it would be the general 2009 plan, if they're a general member. It would be the lifeguard 2012 and the fire 2011. I may have those dates backwards, but they would go back in, they would go into that plan. So if they never had any service that would have qualified for membership, they become a member once they enter a position eligible for membership. If they had time that they were eligible for membership, but are in a no standard hour position right now, they are not eligible to make that decision to join SDCERS until they become eligible for membership again. And at that point, the unions have negotiated, they get the old make whole, they get the penalty payment, all those pieces still apply. And we're working right now to identify, that's a royal we, risk management is working right now to identify what that population is. It's really important that we all understand who those people are. They think that it's probably less than a dozen people, which would be fantastic, because that's something that both risk management and SDCERS has to be aware of. And we just had a large group of people right before July 8th become members, and it was a lot of library aides who had been no standard hours. Some of them had been working for the city for 10, 12, 15 years. And so it can be a very long time before someone becomes eligible for membership. And if it's 15 years from now, I will be retired in 15 years. I will be retired in 15 years.
Can't.
Thank you, Bobby. But we want to make sure that, and we joke about that the only person who's going to be left is Carly Danny over in risk management, because the rest of us, if it takes 15 years, we will all be retired. And Carly doesn't want the responsibility of trying to keep track of who these people are through the years. So we are looking at that. Part of the winding down now is looking at who opted to stay in SPSPH, because we need to keep track of those people as well. If they leave and come back, they still can't come into the pension system. So how does risk management track that? It is ultimately the city's responsibility, but as a good partner with the city, we also want to know who those people are, and we have the ability, we think, to be able to track them as well. So it's all the little pieces that are the ones that take the most time of figuring out that last bit.
Is all of this annotated in their file? So when they call the call center, do you have notes in there for all of these little pieces?
Well, if they're not a member and haven't ever been a member, then there's nothing in the call center to know. So they would have to call risk management, and that's part of what risk management needs to look at. I know that Sarah Dixon recently completed her audit of looking at Prop B, and that's one of her significant recommendations, is that the city needs to have a process in place to keep track of this.
Right on.
Can I add just one quick thing that you will like? Whoa, sorry if that was me. For this group of 40, I'm just gonna do this. Not who you are asking about. On the spreadsheet that I created, I did contact tickets. So as soon as they come over in the transmittal, those 40 people, we're gonna turn around and copy that information on this group that we have been working with already. And we're gonna put all that in IRIS. That's a different situation for the larger number that Marcel's talking about, but I thought of that in advance of, we wanna have the notes of what we talked to them about. So as soon as they get here, we'll enter those in.
It's an amazing project.
It actually has been fascinating, challenging, but it's been a good challenge.
Marcel, I looked at the last bullet, and I was curious, sort of in the big picture, how this is handled. So am I correct in assuming if somebody left and they had the equivalent of a 401k, and they, at whatever is offered to them, decide, I just want to keep my 401k, then that's it. They're gone, and they'll have some sort of period whereby they have an opportunity to get back into the system, and if they don't avail themselves of it, then that takes care of that piece, right? So then you have a piece of people who've gone and want to come back into the system, right? And so they just want credits in the system, and so there'll be some process similar to the other Prop B employees where they have to give up part of their 401k or all of it or whatever to get those number of years. Is that right?
So you're talking about people that have separated or people that are still employed?
No, who separated, who came and left during that 9 and change years of the Prop B period.
Yeah, it was so close to 10 years. It was
Right.
like a week and a half away from being a 10-year process. So for those people that have left and have not returned to the city, so my understanding is the way that it is written right now in the MOUs, they will get a one-time opportunity to opt to join SDCERS. And we work on providing the costing to the city, but the city works with the employee or former employee and looks at what the balance had been in their SPSPH account, and they do some math on their side that determines whether, if the SPSP funds are still at the city, that's great, they can transfer them over and join. If they've taken those funds and the city says, this is how much you have to come up with out of pocket, the city still covers the balance. So that's their first bite of the apple. The agreements are also written that if within 2 years of being offered to come back and offered to enter the system and choosing not to, if within 2 years they come back to work for the city and they stay working for the city for a year, they will have another opportunity to purchase that previous time with the make whole provision and the penalty provisions. If they still opt not to do that, all hope is not lost. They can still do it later, but they do it under what we call a regular Chiron contract, and that requires them to pay the full actuarial cost from both the city side and the employee side, and that is a more expensive contract. So these people that have separated if they never come back to the city, they've only got one chance to do it. But if they end up coming back to the city, they really have 3 chances to purchase this time.
Okay, so really interesting. And so you mentioned them being out of pocket in some circumstances. And if I recall correctly, when the Prop B people who are still working for the city decided to come back, opted to come into the system, the most they had to pay was whatever was in their 401k max. So they were not, quote unquote, out of pocket. Are these people potentially going to be treated differently than that?
These union contracts treat them the same for those first 2 options. If they want to buy it when they are not employed by the city, or if they want to buy it when they come back to the city, in both cases, the make whole provision is what says, we'll take what was in your SPSBH account, and that's all you have to pay. Now, where they could be out of pocket in that is if they took those SPSBH funds and perhaps spent them.
Oh, okay.
Then the city's saying, that's what was in there, that's what you have to come up with.
Right.
Or if they have put them into, even if they rolled them over into something that wasn't earning as much, whatever the circumstances may be, but the city is saying you would have to come up with at least the SPSPH balances. And again, there's some fairly complex math that's being done on that and some calculations that have been done on that. If, though, they don't take the first opportunity and they don't take the second opportunity, that third opportunity, the straight Chiron calculated contract, that is all on the employee to come up with those funds. They can use their 401k monies to pay for it, but it is their responsibility to come up with those funds.
So an example, somebody came on board with the city during the period, they worked 3 years, whatever, they had money in this SPSBH account. They have been gone for 10 years or 5 years or whatever it is. They come back and they want to get into the system. The city essentially has to calculate what part of their SPSP out there would have been a certain amount of money, right?
Yes.
That they would need to forego or give up, right? And
Correct.
so what you're basically saying is, if among other things, if they left and then they cashed out their SPSP totally, then they're going to have to pay whatever the city determines it would have been with interest in their SPSP.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. That seems really easy.
It's a piece of cake.
3,000 times. It's really easy.
Yes. I don't
You
have
done?
I am finished, yes. I mean, there are other things in my report, but I was not planning on talking about them, so.
Well, that was impressive.
Thank you.
It's impressive what you have up here. So please take very good care of it.
Thank you.
Did you who presented the budget to the city council?
That was Greg and Ted who presented that.
Oh, Greg,
And
Greg.
Ted unfortunately is not here today.
Yeah,
He
he's
has
not. I wanted to compliment whoever it was that prepared those slides. They are very clear, easy to understand, and I'm sure the city council was happy with it.
I am sure Ted's watching. He has a sick child, so.
Okay.
So just to
Yeah.
speak on Ted's behalf, yes, the city council annually invites SDCERS to present an informational item. They recognize that the Board of Administration has budgetary authority, but the city council does like to hear from SDCERS on how's their budget looking and just kind of getting an overview and just staying connected. So they asked us to have a very brief conversation, which we gladly supplied them. They were very thankful to the Board of Administration. They expressed their appreciation for the board's professionalism in carrying out our duties, and so they said thank you very much. We did receive 2 questions,
Oh, that's good.
which had nothing to do with the budget.
Okay.
So, but it was nice to have that connection and build those relationships
Yes.
with the city council. And this year there was no public comment. Sometimes people also use that as a platform to
Right.
communicate with SDCERS.
Well, that's good.
Thank you.
How long were you there?
We were there, the budget hearing started at 9, and we went on at 11:50. It was, I purposely made Marcel and Ted come with me early. They had a couple budget hearings before the city council. It was the homeless strategies and solutions discussion.
Yes.
Which was fascinating to understand just the breadth and the challenges faced by the city and how they're trying to solve some of these problems as a community. And then followed by the Housing Commission and then the Convention Center. Just
Very interesting.
amazing what the city council, what the breadth of the issues that they need to address and take on for our community.
I'm sure they were relieved to hear your report.
Yes.
It ended on a high note, that meeting. Marcel, since you're on a roll, I have a, do you want to just explain to us the issue with Barry Butler
Sure.
on the members owing in excess of 10,000?
Yes, so Barry Butler is a new addition to the over 10,000 report. As you may recall, the board rules require anytime there is a correction of over $10,000, we need to report it to the board as soon as we're aware of it. So Mr. Butler separated from service back from the city back in 2019. And not too long afterwards, in January of 2020, he withdrew his funds from SDCERS, which is his right once he separates service. He was also at that time in a parallel path appealing his termination, and the Civil Service Commission did overturn his termination. What they did at that time is they retroactively reinstated him, effective to the date that he was terminated. So, and then put him on unpaid suspension until the date that he came back to work and now is working and contributing again. Because that retroactive reinstatement makes him have unbroken membership with SDCERS, that refund is an impermissible in-service distribution, and he must pay that back. Unfortunately, it is a significant amount of money, and we have been working with Mr. Butler on how we can accomplish that. There are some options. If Mr. Butler chooses to pay back, then he would be eligible to retire from SDCERS. If his circumstances are such that he maybe thinks he's not going to ever work long enough to get a benefit from SDCERS, then he doesn't have to pay that back. He could pay it back, but then he could turn around again when he separates service and get a refund. And the contributions he's making right now as well, if he doesn't work long enough to get a benefit, then when he separates service, he'd be able to get a refund. He's an older gentleman, so I don't know that he will work long enough to get to 10 years of vesting with the city, but it's a challenge, and it's an unfortunate circumstance. This report has gotten very small, as has the annual report that we present that you'll see next month on any corrections over $1,000. So I'm very happy that it continues to get smaller, and these are very unfortunate circumstances that SDCERS hands are really tied on this.
All right, thank you. And I see that Chiron presented to the city council since we last met.
They did, yes.
And how did that go?
That was very long. It was a very good presentation. There were a number of questions, and I don't have all of my notes with me, but there were two pieces that Chiron presented. One was, again, similar to how the city asks SDCERS to present the budget each year. They also ask Chiron, they have traditionally asked Chiron to come and present the valuation. It fell by the wayside during the COVID years and now is back, so Chiron went to present. There was an additional request. The IBA's office, apparently part of their mandate is to provide 2 educational sessions a year to the council. And so they had asked if Chiron would do an Actuary 101 presentation. There are a lot of new board members. In fact, I think the majority of the board members, of the council members, had not heard a presentation from Chiron because they'd come on right before COVID or during the COVID years. So Chiron did 2 presentations. That was about 45 minutes of presentation, and then there was about 45 minutes of discussion afterwards.
Wow.
There was significant discussion regarding the cliff and the amortization policies. We let them know that Chiron is coming to this board in September with an experience study. They'll be here next month in July to do some actuarial training on amortization periods and how that impacts the ADC, how it impacts our funding ratio. So July, we'll just be talking about that piece. September will be the full experience study. So we let the city know that. And there were some comments that they may potentially want to hear more about that afterwards. So we would coordinate with the IBA's office if they have more questions. That was a significant part of the questions. There were some questions on the discount rate and the appropriateness of it, which Gene commented on and said he feels that it is appropriate. It's in line with what still is going on in the world, so that was appreciated.
Question about the COLA. Somebody asked about the COLA.
Oh, yes, there was a question, so it feeds into the article that's in the paper and what we discussed earlier. There was a question about the COLA and could that be increased? And we reminded them that that is actually in the municipal code, and so SDCERS can't do it on their own, but if the city were to change that, then we would follow their rules. Interesting to note, the assumption right now in the valuations for the COLA is 1.9%, even though the maximum COLA is 2%, because 1.9 more closely mirrors what's been going on. So that is something that I'm sure Gene will be discussing. There was not a lot of discussion on salaries, but that also is an impact. The increases, both the increases several years ago to the police officers, remember that was well over 30% over a couple years, and now the most recent agreements, it's over 20% over the next 3 years for general members. That will also impact evaluation. So it was Anne from, I just drew a blank on Anne's last name. It's a Harper, Ann Harper, thank you, not Anne Hathaway, that's the actress, Ann Harper. So it was Gene Kalwarski and Ann Harper presented, and then it will be Gene and Ann presenting in July, and then Gene and Alice will be here in September.
Great. Well, thank you for all of that.
Bobby, if I could just make a couple comments. I had an opportunity to watch the entire presentation that Mr. Kalwarski made, and nothing in it would be a surprise to this board. It's material that he's delivered before, so that was good. And it was really extraordinary that the council members were in rapt attention the entire time. I mean, they really seemed to be absorbing the information, and they did speak quite a bit later. However, a day or two later, article comes out in the UT, which referred to Mr. Kalwarski as the city's actuary.
Oh.
And then goes on to, in great detail, about what this board can do to relieve some of the costs of the city by refinancing and so on and so forth. And reading the article, one would get the impression that Mr. Kalwarski had in some way advocated in a particular direction. But I'd watched the entire presentation, and he did nothing of the sort. And I was really disappointed with the UT's reporting on it, because it was, in one case, just wrong about who the actuary reports to, and in the other, really quite misleading in terms of what the presentation was all about with respect to our decision coming up, I think, in September. And it led me to call Greg or talk to Greg about, where do you imagine they get this information? And I mean the UT. And I guess neither one of us knows, but clearly it was not part of the presentation. So kind of a strange situation. And I felt in reading that article that there was someone talking to the reporter who was trying to push us in a particular direction. Thanks.
Chris, that's not the first time that UT articles have been inaccurate. Yeah, it's a recurring experience with them.
Up to now, I thought they were perfect each time.
All right, everything is very interesting. Interesting times, right? So information technology. Michelle.
Good morning. I'm happy to introduce Norma Frank as our new Application Services Manager.
You may be looking over my shoulder trying to find a new face. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your perspective, she had prearranged travel plans that she's not here today. Norma comes to us with 20 years of experience in technology, business process improvements, and communication skills. The Application Services Manager is a critical role that manages all of our enterprise solutions as well as project manages all of our new implementations. Throughout background checks, we heard a common theme described as Norma as her professionalism, her problem-solving skills, and just overall a truly good person. So we are very excited to have her join the team, and I look forward to you meeting her in person at the next meetings. I'd also like to highlight from my written report the completion of our migration of disaster recovery services to the cloud. We outsource our disaster recovery for our pension administration service to Sagitech. They have on their strategic roadmap to migrate all of their client services from their local data center to the cloud, which includes SDCERS services. That project was led by Sean Kilback, our operations manager, along with our IT team in collaboration with Sagitech's network team. They migrated all the servers, data migration to the cloud, and through thorough review, everything was tested and security is sound and replication is happening real time. Every year we do a test of the business continuity in our disaster recovery plan. In June, we'll do a simulated event of that exercise. So that'll be the true test of how our environment in the cloud is configured and the making sure it can support that exercise. Thomas, I also wanted to thank you at the last meetings for asking the questions on the help desk reports. We went back and looked at those, and I too disliked the general or other or miscellaneous categories. So we went and looked at that and see if we can find some improvements to how we're reporting on help desk statistics. We did find that we do not have a category of other, but that is a system feature that collects all the categories that have less than a certain quantity of tickets and calls them other in order to reformat that report into a readable format on a page. Although that's taken us down a rabbit hole to see if there's better statistics that we can report to you guys to show the customer service that your IT group is providing to the organization. So look for some changes in our status report on an ongoing basis. And that concludes my report, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions?
Yeah, Michelle, just a question about our Microsoft systems. So when I came on board and you provided me with this nice iPad and so forth, and I was looking into the version of Outlook there, I've been using Microsoft 365 for, I don't know, 4 or 5 years or whatever, and I noticed, and you and I discussed, that your generation of Microsoft products is a couple before that or something. Is there some plan along the lines to get up to speed, so to speak, with the current versions of Microsoft?
Yes, thanks for the question. We are on the most recent version for on-prem licensing. We do have our renewal coming up in the next year for our master services agreement with Microsoft. We'll be strategizing with them how to bring us up into the 365 version. It is a strategic effort, so it's not a simple effort to just migrate into the 365. That does roll into our cloud strategy. So we will be working in the next year to put together that strategy of how we can get to that first cloud footprint of Microsoft.
Thanks. So a year or so from now, hopefully.
I would say a year or two. It's a strategic effort, so there's certain steps and prerequisites to get us into the exchange. There's a whole footprint we need to make and pull in security parameters into that. So I would start the efforts probably in the next year and see us migrate to that version in the next 2 years.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you
Thank you, Bob.
very much.
Thank you.
Do we have any questions or comments from any board members? If not, great. Oh,
So I'm taking it, are we talking about Were you moving down to number 5 on the agenda? Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. I just had a question going back to the members owing in excess of $10,000. So we obviously had this unfortunate situation with Blanco. I'm wondering how does the process work, and who makes a decision like that, and is there something we need to do differently so that that doesn't happen again?
That's a lot of pieces to that question.
Well, I'm trying to be delicate in my question.
So Sandra has changed some of the processes in the death processing area. One of the challenges is conversion data. And so conversion data not always showing what the correct information is and then having to go through other paper documents. So we are working on improvements to that process so that something like this doesn't happen again. It's an unusual, rare occurrence, but it can be quite challenging when you start looking into who is owed, especially when you have situations where at the time the member retired, they were married, and later, at the time of their death, they are no longer married to that person, which that person may or may not still qualify for a benefit.
Yeah, it just looking to me, it looked like perhaps, and maybe this is what you're working on, that there needed to be some sort of considering the amount of money we're talking about here, that there might need to be some secondary approval process or whatever before the money goes out. But I don't know, because I don't understand how the system works.
So there are approval processes in place, but the approval process was based on looking at an incorrect document.
Right, okay.
So, but we don't normally send out sums of that amount, or any amount actually, for death without a secondary approval.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Come on, Greg, you've got something. How was your Ireland trip?
The Ireland trip was wonderful, and I just really would like to give a shout out to Marcel. She accompanied Jean and Ann from Chiron to go speak with the city council. And Jean is very good about actuarial science, but the city council was asking lots of other types of questions beyond Jean's expertise. And I was very, very proud of Marcel and very fortunate that we had her there to also talk with city council. So just thank you, Marcel.
Marcel has a lot on her plate. We thank you. We're going to have an armed guard follow you everywhere. Johnny, do we have anything in closed session?
We don't.
All right. Any other questions? Sorry, Paul, you're sitting over there. We're going to have to move you over here next time.
I can watch all of you from over here.
All right, then. This meeting is adjourned. It's 10:23 a.m.